The Eagle Fire was first reported in the Lassen Modoc Ranger Unit as a small vegetation fire on the west side of Highway 395, about 5 miles south of Janesville, California. Erratic wind conditions drove the Eagle Fire north and south along Highway 395, creating extreme fire behavior and some close calls, but no incidents. The next morning, fire behavior conditions were initially moderate, but as the day of July 8th progressed, erratic fire activity became extreme fire behavior. Fire shelters were deployed in 3 incidents, the last culminating in serious injuries to firefighters. In the first, a CDF battalion chief, engine, and dozer, along with a Lassen County dozer, were trapped when erratic fire activity overran their position at roughly 11:10. A safety zone was constructed, and the dozer operators took shelter in the crew compartment of the CDF engine. At around 1300 hours, a CDF heli-attack crew was attempting a backfiring operation when erratic fire activity overran their position. The crew was forced to deploy their fire shelters in the 2-blade-wide dozer line from which they were firing from. No injuries occurred. Then, an hour and a half later, at approximately 1440 hours, CDF engine 2387 was traveling southbound 395 toward the southeast portion of the fire when they observed a spot fire on the east side of the highway. They initiated an 1.5-inch hose laid down the bank. This crew was joined shortly by engines 4474 and 2379. Shortly after knocking down this spot fire, a fire whirl advanced from the main fire. This fire whirl, estimated at 200 feet tall, crossed onto Highway 395, centered there momentarily, then moved southwesterly across the highway, leaving a 95-foot scorch mark. The spot fire, which the firefighters had just contained, was reignited. Numerous other spots ignited when the estimated 100-mile-per-hour winds hit the east of Highway 395, causing immediate blow-up conditions. 4 of the firefighters, trying to return to Highway 395, which was only 100 feet from where they were stood, were lifted off the ground and rolled by the velocity of the whirlwind. Each of these firefighters received varying degrees of burns. A 5th firefighter, Mike Kirby, seeing the velocity of the wind and subsequent effect it had on the fire activity between himself and the highway, moved farther away from the highway and fire whirl. He climbed the right-of-way fence and moved to the abandoned highway where he deployed his shelter for radiant heat deflection and proceeded to the south of the now hotly burning fire between himself and Highway 395. After moving far enough to the south, he left the old highway pavement, returned to 395, and advised his CO he was safe. As soon as the 4 burned firefighters reached the highway, they were placed on fire engines and moved approximately 300 yards to the south for medical attention. The fire, burning extremely hot on both sides of 395, began advancing toward the scene where first aid was being administered. Everyone was again loaded into vehicles and moved a half-mile further south to a safer location where the burned firefighters were prepped for air transport to the Chico Burn Center.
Factors were present to suggest the potential for severe fire behavior. The well-advertised drought, high winds, and earlier events that day should have been taken into consideration. The area they were working on also had no immediate threats to structures. To ensure my safety and the safety of others around me, I will constantly monitor my 18 watch-out situations and follow my 10 standing orders. I will also think about the risk versus gain and determine if this is a good and safe working area for firefighters to be in.
Physical fitness did not directly play a role in the Eagle Fire incident. However, physical fitness is still a very important factor in our safety as firefighters. The more physically fit a firefighter is, the greater the chance they can stay out of or get out of harm's way. A physically fit firefighter will fatigue at a slower rate, and therefore they will have more energy to escape a bad situation or think more clearly in high intensity and physically demanding conditions. To improve physical fitness, a firefighter should drink adequate fluids, eat a well-balanced diet, and exercise in a way that improves endurance and strength. Examples of exercise include stretching and core exercises for injury prevention and strength, running, hiking, cycling, gym cardio machines to improve cardiovascular fitness and endurance.
All involved personnel were wearing appropriate PPE except Firefighter Wright. Firefighter Wright was not wearing his goggles at the time of the incident. Firefighter Wright sustained second and third-degree burns on 45% of his body. Firefighter Durbani was wearing appropriate PPE, but their helmet was lost when a portion of the chin strap failed in the high winds. Firefighter Durbani sustained second-degree burns on 3.5% of the body. Also wearing appropriate PPE, Firefighter Nelson's shelter pouch melted and stuck to his glove when he was preparing for deployment. Firefighter Nelson's melting shelter pouch contributed to second and third-degree burns on 10% of his body. Firefighter Scales sustained second-degree burns on 5% of the body, even though prepared with proper PPE.
Yes, a number of standard firefighter orders were violated during the Eagle burnover. They didn't keep well enough informed of weather conditions and forecast. They didn't know what the fire was doing at all times. They didn't base their actions on current and expected fire behavior. They didn't identify a very good escape route. They didn't have a lookout, and communication was not great.
Several of the 18 watch-out situations became issues contributing to the Eagle Fire burnover in 1989, including being unfamiliar with local weather conditions and wind patterns, and a breakdown in crew communication.
LCES was utilized, but it was not used to the extent that it should have been. The consequence of the flawed LCES strategy of the Eagle Fire incident was that firefighters were injured due to a lack of awareness and a lack of clear communication. Lookouts were in position, however, they were not successful due to the rapid growth of the fire. Authorities on duty the day of the incident did not have the awareness and knowledge of the previous day's hazardous, windy fire conditions. For example, the strike team led by Battalion Chief Gaskell had only recently arrived on scene and did not have or obtain weather history of the fire. The escape route plan was to retreat back to the engines parked on Highway 395. The blowtorch-like conditions of the fire whirl that ultimately burned the firefighters compromised the escape route. The safety zone was planned out to be Highway 395 and the engines parked on 395. This was not adequate considering fire conditions.
Yes, a couple of common denominators were a factor in the Eagle burnover. There was an unexpected wind shift in direction and speed. The fire responded to topographic conditions. The alignment of topography and wind during the burning period should always be considered a trigger point to reevaluate strategies and tactics.
Extreme fire behavior is the whole story when it comes to the Eagle burnover. Was it predictable? Impossible to say, but the incident had a lot of warning signs. First off, a critical fire weather pattern. As the large desert area of Nevada and Utah heated up, a heat low forms, drawing in low-level air and creating a phone Santa Ana effect. As the local winds flowed across the green areas from Honey Lake, they reached the warmer slopes, lifted, and were met with the surfacing westerlies. This resulted in erratic and accelerated wind conditions and fire whirls. Numerous witnesses reported seeing dust devils and fire whirls throughout the late morning and into the afternoon. The same observations were made the previous day. In fact, a similar incident occurred the day before, just a quarter mile up Highway 395. But in that case, the engine operator was able to pull out as the fire crossed the road and then return to the scene after the fire had subsided. In addition to this atmospheric instability, temperatures were in the 94 to 97 degree range, relative humidity hovered between 1 and 13%, and abnormally dry fuel loads created big trouble. Fuel in the area of the spot fire and where injuries were sustained consisted of 2 to 4 foot sagebrush intermixed with discontinuous 12 to 18 inch tall grasses. Fuel on the west side of 395, where the main body of the fire resided, transitioned from 6 to 8 foot bitterbrush on lower slopes, then to frequently dense stands of Jeffrey pine conifer. This incident also occurred in the critical burn time period, identified in the IRPG as 1400 to 1700. Obviously, the most dramatic aspect of the Eagle Burnover's fire behavior was the 200-foot fire whirl that ragdolled the firefighters and hurled them over the embankment. Fire whirls indicate atmospheric instability, but they're also indicators of more severe fire behavior to come. In fact, any fire whirl can exponentially increase a fire's rate of spread. Fire whirls often develop on the lee side of ridges. As a result, fire whirls are often seen in places that are associated with downslope winds and downhill fire runs, like we saw in the Eagle Burnover. Fire whirls should be a warning sign to all wildland firefighters that conditions are right for extreme and unpredictable fire behavior. When fire whirls appear, the experienced leader should take precautions such as posting extra lookouts, bringing crew members into close proximity, briefing on safety zones, and direction of retreat. The old adage of 1 foot in the burn for safety is never more true than when the fire whirls appear. If you're working indirect line or structure protection and fire whirls appear, post more lookouts and consider burning out. If that's not possible, consider disengagement. When fire whirls are sighted, it is imperative to advise line personnel, contact division supervisors and adjacent crews, and advise them of whirl activity.
Crew cohesion can be defined as a team's ability to stick together and remain united in the pursuit of a common goal. Everyone can play a role in crew cohesion by remaining positive and being there for one another in pursuit of that goal.
The fire service has so many safety guidelines because an enormous amount of things can go wrong both on and off a fire line. Safety guidelines are disregarded for reasons such as a lack of training and fatigue, but they can also be the result of hazardous attitudes such as a sense of invulnerability, anti-authoritarianism, impulsiveness, machismo, complacency, a resignment, or a groupthink situation where subordinates are afraid to speak up or disagree. Ultimately, we are responsible for our own safety and should not assume or expect anyone else is watching out. Like most fire incidents, the Eagle Burnover highlighted the importance of the 10 standard firefighting orders and the 18 watch-out situations. This event in particular underscored the importance of identifying the possibility of extreme fire behavior due to weather, time of day, and topography.